Welcome to Conquering Your Clownfish, a podcast dedicated to transforming disabilities into special abilities. I'm your host, Brady Murray. Welcome to the Conquering Your Clownfish podcast. I am thrilled to introduce our special guest today, Laney Wootten. Lainey is coming to us from Texas, where she resides with her husband, John, and their 7 beautiful children. Her oldest child has level 3 severe autism, and her 6th child has Down syndrome. Lainey and her husband advocate and encourage parents online by transparently sharing their struggles and victories. You can follow their journey on their Instagram channel, where they give hope and support to those who love someone with special needs. Lainey, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a fun conversation. You have a lot on your plate right now. Is that correct?
Yes, and I pray every day, Lord, what can I take off my plate? So far, he's not told me what I can push off the plate.
It's only what's going to be added. Yep, that's exactly right. And so before we get into the thick of it, I have to ask, how's your garden going?
Oh, well, it's good. It's gone very good. I've harvested a lot of tomatoes and green beans. I do flower gardening. I do like little mini arrangements and deliver those locally. I was just digging up potatoes right before I came on here. So it's good. I love gardening. My dad was a gardener. My dad passed away of COVID. So gardening definitely makes me feel close to him. So in fact, his garden that he had, like all growing up, it's like I can see it from my garden. So like we built a house right next door to their house. So it's really special. So, but yeah, it's doing really good.
I will say that I follow you on Instagram, and I'm jealous of the type of produce that you are producing. We are gardeners as well, and we just can't quite keep up with what you're producing down there. So there must be something good in that soil, and you must have a good green thumb.
Well, my husband built me raised beds 2 years ago, and so that's a huge, part of it, because we can really manage the soil well, and it's on well water. So
wonderful,
yeah.
wonderful. I do feel, and as I follow you, it makes more sense now on how that is a very therapeutic thing for you. But I can tell that that's your respite. That's an area that you go to for respite.
For sure.
So let's jump into it. I would love to hear about your family. So you have 7 children. Could you talk to us a little bit about your family?
I have 7 children. Like you said, my oldest has severe autism. And I'm sure the question in everyone else's mind right now when they hear that is like, well, you kept going? And we're like, yeah, we did. We kept going. And it was the hardest, most trying years in our marriage and our life, the decision to keep going, because, we just prayerfully considered every pregnancy, and it got harder. Every child, it just does. It got harder. But we prayed, Lord, make it very, very clear when we're done. And so I had Hazel, who is 13, then I had Titus, who's now 10, Evangeline, I hate having to say their ages because I forget their ages, 8, Esther, 6, Mabel with Down syndrome, she's 5, Silas, I don't think I forgot anybody, he's 2, soon to be 3. And so when I was in labor with Silas, my uterus was just really tired, and I had a traumatic delivery, nearly died.
Wow.
I had to have 6 bags of blood to save my life, save his life. I was in ICU, had like 7 surgeries after that. It was so scary, but God made it clear. It's like, okay, we've had the children that he intended for us to have. And I needed that clarity. My husband didn't really need that clarity. Like he was fine with making that decision. For me, I really wrestled, because my personality is like, there's black and there's white and there's right and there's wrong. And like, we just got to know that we're not leaving anybody out that God wants to have. So that's kind of in a nutshell, like how we built our family. And of course it was, I hate to say this, but I'm a pretty transparent person, but like, we held our breath with every pregnancy. Like, are we going to have another child with autism? Because my son's autism was in the driver's seat of our house. Like it was calling all the shots and totally taking over daily life. And So when we had another child and they were meeting their milestones, we just would just exhale this sigh of relief, like, okay, like we're in the clear with that one, And then, of course, when I was getting a sonogram with Mabel, they saw like what they thought was a cyst on her belly. And so they sent us to a specialist. My midwife was like, it's probably nothing, but it was something. It was duodenal atresia, which is a blockage in the intestines. And then I thought that was going to be like the end of the story. And the specialist just very bluntly was like, no, and she has, a congenital heart defect, and she's going to have surgery soon after birth. You can't deliver here. And she probably has Down syndrome. We're just like,
Wow.
what? So that was a lot. And then, of course, we processed all that and we got through all the medical stuff, and we don't regret any of the children that we have. And we see their perfect puzzle shape in the family and how they all complement each other. And that's what we like to talk about online, is that each of their lives has, predestined value and purpose, no matter what, the world says that they contribute, like God made them. And I love seeing that unfold in our family. And it unfolds daily. And those are the snapshots I take and share with the world. I want the world to see that life is never a mistake. Life is never just happenstance. Like, God does it, and everything he does is good, and just seeing it just kind of, the story just unfold. It's just really beautiful, and seeing how the siblings all relate to each other and how they're growing with each other and better because of each other. It's just, it's wonderful. I will tell you, now that like we're done having children, there is a sense of like, okay, it's almost like a resolve. And I hate to use the word relief, but in a little bit of a way, there was a relief, like, okay, like, all right, that's it. Like that's what God's going to give us. And now we're kind of moving forward and we're taking care of these children. But there was always this unended, like, is there another one coming? And that part of our lives is behind us now. And, but I personally did grieve that. And I think every woman probably does, whether they want to admit it or not, a little bit. It's sad, when you realize I'm done. But that's kind of the story of building our family, and that's who they are. And then John, my husband, he's an amazing man. We're musicians, actually. So I was asked to lead worship for a youth camp and was 19 years old and needed a guitar player, and found out about this guy whose band just broke up and asked him to come and try out. And I always joke that I was looking for a guitar player, but I got a husband out of the deal too. So,
Two for one.
Yeah. So our relationship began with music and worship leading. And 9 years we traveled in a band, and that was a lot of fun, and wrote and recorded music together. And then, of course, we shifted, completely focusing on our family, because our family's needs were increasing with every child. And so that was kind of tabled, but we do serve in our church. It's not like pursued like a career like it once was 10 years ago or more now.
I would love to talk a little bit about Jude. And so this is something that you share openly online, just of some of those struggles that having a child with this severe of autism has been for your family. When Jude was born, was it like, how quickly were you recognizing that, milestones aren't being met? There's definitely something going on here. Could you share with us a little bit about that initial first months or years and how that has evolved over the last, I think Jude is 15 now?
Yes, he's 15. We were actually traveling, leading worship at a church. I was 34 weeks pregnant and my water broke. We were 5 hours from home, staying with a family in the church, and ended up staying a lot longer than we originally planned to stay. And so I always say Jude's life started as a whirlwind, as a tornado. We were just like totally unprepared, and it was so like foreshadowing of what was coming. So that being said, he was premature. So we in Texas have, I don't know what you call it, department of our state that's called the Early Childhood Intervention, ECI. And so it's free. It's basically public school services before the age of 3. And so you can just call them and get screenings done for free. And someone had encouraged me to do that because he was premature. And so he was 4 months old. Someone came and did some testing, and so he couldn't finger track. And so, like, he would stop tracking the finger, like, just like, 1 second in. And so he qualified with that. And so we started services, but it was all kind of under the umbrella of, oh, he's premature. He'll catch up. He'll catch up. And then around 12 months, and keep in mind, this is my first child, so I have nothing to compare him to. I started noticing just some odd behavior. Like when I would be in another room and I'd call Jude's name, like he would scream and he'd run away. He'd be startled by my voice. And then I started noticing things like when I called his name, he wouldn't even respond at all. Like if I was close by him, or if I held him up close to my face, he wouldn't look at me. And so if you Google those things, autism comes up. And so we had already had a case manager with the ECI program. And so I had them come, and he was diagnosed with a very vague and unhelpful diagnosis of PDD-NOS, a pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, at 17 months. And so it's basically their way of saying, yeah, something's wrong. It's probably autism, but we can't say that because he's still developing. So it just left me as a new mom going, should I be sad or should I keep being hopeful? Like, what do I do? So it's kind of a long, drawn out process of, is something wrong? But like when you have a kid with autism and when you compare them to their peers, the younger they are, so this is like the gap, but the older they are, the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. And so I would say around 2, because we were still traveling with our band and there were like 2 other wives. We all had babies at the same time. And I was seeing our kids play together and the gap was huge. And it was just like, my heart sank. I remember specifically being at it was like a retreat center and watching them play. And the other 2 little girls were taking toys to their mom and, jabbering and talking. And Jude was just like at the table, just staring at the toy, like I wasn't even in the room. So he got his diagnosis really young. He started public school at 3. That's what we get to do here in Texas if you have a disability. And at 3 is when he became very difficult to handle. Prior to that, he was just kind of in his own world. I could take him anywhere. It was super easy. I'd give him an iPad. I could go to the dentist. I could go to the chiropractor, just set him right there. He wouldn't move. He was glued to his iPad, which hindsight, that was all signs of autism.
Yep.
But he became aggressive and very hyperactive, very defiant at 3. And that's when life began to completely change. And so at that time, we were living in West Texas, and we realized our roles were totally off as husband and wife. I was working full time. My husband was at home because I made the better salary. And he was miserable, and I was miserable. And we were like, what are we doing? Like, we're making spreadsheet decisions here, like not biblical decisions. Like, we have got to get our home in order. And so, like, I quit my job, and we totally stepped out on faith, and we moved back home. And so we moved back home, and then that's when things really started to get rough with Jude, which I'm so glad we moved back home. So that's where my parents were, John's parents were. And so they started school, and it was like just every year it got harder, and he got more aggressive. They were more difficult to handle. I mean, things like trying to jump out of our car when we would drive, running into a highway, laughing, cars flying by him, running out of Walmart. We couldn't find him. I had to call the police. Was found at Chick-fil-A with no clothes on. Like fits of rage where he just couldn't control himself. He couldn't be told no. Sharp mood swings. And we were all on edge. We were all just at his mercy, really, is what it felt like. And kids were scared of him. The bigger he got, I got scared of him, and here around 8 or 9 is whenever I started to pull back. So my husband was working, and I was like kind of the main hands-on person.
Yep.
But I'll never forget, I was actually on this bed right here. He pinned me down because I was, wrestling with him. And it went from like, you stop that, to have mercy on me, don't hurt me. Like, because I was like, he was on top of me, had me down. And I remember thinking, I'm done. I'm out. Like, I'm not the one to do this anymore. He's only going to get bigger. And so so everything started to shift at that point. So then John wasn't able to work as much. He actually changed jobs and started working at the school so that he could be close to Jude and he could be off when Jude was off. But then we still had summers that we had to figure out. And probably when he was around 10 or 11, that's when we started to have the conversation about what would we do if something happened to John, because John was at that point like the only one that could handle him. We're like, we're going to have to start thinking about a residential placement. And it was like something we put off talking about for a really long time, because it was like somebody hit us in the stomach every time we even just entertained the idea or the thought of it. We had such scary moments happening at our house that with every episode, it was just like, we have to. And so during COVID, the school shut down and we're like, now what? I mean, my husband can't work. Like, what do we do? Thankfully, the school was super gracious and let John go to work when Jude would fall asleep. So John would get up to the school at like 10 at night and he'd go up there and work till like 2 a.m. And we just hoped that Jude would sleep in some. And then he would be on. I mean, COVID was such a hard time, as you know, for people who had kids with special needs. We're just like, what are we going to do? Like, what do we do? But during that time, so we call it a LIDA here, the Local Intellectual Developmental Disability Authority. We have these authorities that govern several counties in Texas. And so ours is called Community Health Corps. And so we called them and said, we don't know who else to call. Like, what are we going to do? My husband can't work. School shut down. He's the only one that can take care of my son. And they said, we have crisis team. We'll send the crisis team and evaluate the situation. Long story short, in Texas, we have these waiver programs that cover residential care. But the wait lists are like 17 years long.
Yeah.
So
same in you.
Okay. So we had been on the wait list. Well, they have a thing called the crisis diversion slot here in Texas. So if you can apply for a slot to bump you to the top. And so we applied and we got it. And it was bittersweet because it was like, I can't believe we're moving toward residential for him. But what we tried first was they will fund care in the home. And so we did that for about 9 months with several people. But it ended up being to where I had to take my other kids out of the house because there were still these aggressive, big struggles, like chairs flying and, things getting thrown and torn and him trying to ram his body through the window. And that, we had small kids and we were like, we got to get out of here. And so I was like driving around every day, like with my kids and eating out every day and just like felt displaced. Like we were like giving him the house.
Yeah.
And so we did that for several months. And then we just realized we prolonged this long enough. And then it got to where my husband was like winded when he was trying to hold him back. He's like, I don't know how much longer I can hold him back. And at that point we were like, okay, we have to start this process. And so, so we started it to apply for a spot in a state supported living center here in Texas. And we just told ourselves, okay, we're just going to do this. We're going to apply for it. We're going to hope and pray for a miracle that whenever his bed comes up, that we'll get to turn it down, Well, we were like 7 weeks out from having his bed. Like we had an admit day. And my husband was out working late, as he always did, because he had to wait till Jude went to sleep. And he stepped in a hole and he broke his leg. And so he came hopping back in the house. It was like after midnight. It was white as a ghost. Woke me up. He said, I think I broke my leg. And I'm like, oh my gosh. This is what we were.
There's your answer.
Would never happen. Yeah. And so the next day, early in the morning, I texted some of Jude's attendants that we had used. I said, can y'all just come and just be with us so we can figure this out? And I sent my kids somewhere else. And by the end of the day, even with an attendant, he had me up against the wall and gotten mad about something. And my husband sat in a recliner and watched for the very first time.
Goodness.
He'd always been my husband's arms were covered in scratch marks and bite marks and bruises, neck, face. And he'd shielded me for so long. And for the first time, And I knew in that moment Jude was going to have to go to a state hospital because I knew that that could be a holding spot. Now, we had tried to get him admitted to a state hospital to get some temporary treatment, but we'd been denied by like 13 because of his intellectual disability, which in my mind is an injustice, not fair at all. So I'd already been turned down by the Terrell State Hospital, told that all the beds were full, but I just knew I had to just try. And so I told Jude we were going on a ride. I went to his room and I pulled open the one drawer that he had, because at that time we were living with my mom. My dad had just passed away, and we were in between houses. And I just scooped up everything, all the contents of the drawer, and shoved it into like a little bag. I didn't even grab his toothbrush. I was just so out of it, just so like single-minded. I've just got to get into a safe place. And so I took 2 attendants with me. I told them we were going on a ride, and we drove to Terrell. And I just remember just being kind of like stunned that we were doing this. And I told my husband goodbye, and I'm like, I can't believe I'm the one doing this. Never did I think I would be the one. Like, I thought John would be the one, but John was stuck in a chair. He couldn't move. And I remember pulling in. It was late. It was January 1st. It was cold. And I got to the guard shack, and the lady came to the door of the van. And I said, I need to get help for my son. And then I just broke down, just started crying. And they were very compassionate, very sweet. And so I pulled in, and we went to this waiting area, and all the furniture was rubber, rounded. The TV was covered in plexiglass. And it was just like, I cannot believe we're here. Cannot believe we're in this set. I mean, it just felt spooky. It was late at night. It was like an old military base or whatever. It just felt from a movie, And they called his name. We went back there. They evaluated him, and the doctor, without hesitation, said, absolutely, he needs to be here. And there was relief, and then there was sadness, and there was, just shock. And then they called us both back to a room, and a man showed up in scrubs, and he said, okay, I'm going to need you to just walk out of the room. And it's just what nightmares are made of for parents like us, because there's no explaining. And we'd never been separated ever before. And I'm like, I cannot believe that this is happening. And I just looked at Jude and I said, Jude, I'll be back. I promise I'll be back. And I love you. And I walked away, and I heard him say, Mama. And then that was it. And I didn't even know where he was going. I didn't know what they were going to do with him. I didn't know who was going to be there, what it was going to look like. Was he going to be in a room with any other kids? Like, was he going to be with girls? Was he just going to be a boy? I didn't know anything. I was just so desperate. I had no other choices or options. And then I drove away with these 2 attendants who were just precious people. And I remember thinking the emotion that had reigned in my heart for 12 years, well, more like 11 years, because the first 3 were great, of fear was replaced with grief. There was a relief. There was no more fear. There was no, is Jude going to accidentally or purposely hurt anybody in this house? Is he going to hurt himself? I knew he was safe for the first time. And then I drove back and came to my house like, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning. And my husband was sitting in the recliner, and we cried. We just cried. And so Jude stayed there for 7 weeks. And it was a safe place for him to be. It wasn't a good place for him to be. And that's when he was transferred to the Lufkin State Supported Living Center, when his progress really began, when his road to his new life began, was at the Lufkin State Supported Living Center. And, there's a lot of details I could say in between, but that's when my prayer life became really powerful, because that's all I had. They did not allow us to physically be there. I mean, at the state hospital, there was just so much, there was a veil between us in our son. And it was so scary. But we prayed very specific prayers and saw specific prayers answered. God comforted our hearts along that path. He put the right people in Jude's life. And it still hurts, it's just not a pretty, picture. I mean, it's a messy, sad story, but it's a story that talks about just complete and total dependence on God and his sufficiency and his provision and his love for us, and that we're all hoping and waiting for him to make all things new and to heal Jude. And, I had a follower ask me not long ago, do you ever pray for Jude's healing? And I said, absolutely. I've been praying for Jude's healing his whole life. But I remember very specifically one time I was praying for Jude's healing, and I felt the Lord say to me, if you knew that more people would come to know me if I did not heal him, what would you pray? And I remember just like saying, Lord, that's not fair. Don't ask me that. I'm too weak for that question, and then I was very quickly reminded that that is what he did for us. He did not spare his own son, but gave Christ for our salvation. And my prayers did change at that point. And I remember just like kind of laying him on the altar, kind of like Isaac and Abraham, and just like, Lord, you have a plan for Jude's life that's totally outside of my life even. Like, Jude doesn't need me to have a plan for his life, and I think that I had thought, well, what's going to become of him without me there? I'm his voice. I'm his guide. I'm his light. I'm his everything, but I'm not his everything. Like, God actually has a plan for Jude, and to use Jude maybe outside of our home and in a state supported living center where I can't be. Like, Jude can go into places that even I can't go into. And God was using Jude there. And I got real serious about, I've been sharing our story on social media for like 10 years, but I decided like last fall to really niche down and just target special needs families. And that's when the social media accounts like exploded. Just this past week, I've gotten 1,000 followers a day on my Facebook account. It just continues to just grow and grow. And I remember thinking like, Lord, I laid him on the altar. Like, you're using, not healing him. Like, you're using his story. Like, you didn't take all this pain away, like you're delivering us through the pain. I've heard it said, God doesn't necessarily desire to always deliver us from stuff, but through things. And that is the story. That is our story. Like, how God is delivering us through this very hard, painful road of autism. Severe autism.
Yep.
We have seen his faithfulness. I prayed very specific prayers. Like when Jude went to the State Supported Living Center, I prayed that someone there that would love him like we do. And lo and behold, he did. There's a woman there named Antonisha, and she calls Jude her son. And when Jude came in, she did not have any children. So she treated him as her own child. And I could tell you other prayers that were answered, but we have seen God's faithful, loving hand, and just God using Jude's life and just expanding our impact and our influence through his disability.
Yeah.
And that has been a great comfort to us. That has, like I said, I don't really pray for his healing anymore because I see so much purpose and so much fruit from his disability. I know Jude's going to be healed. But, he'll be healed in heaven, and if God wants to use this in a greater way, then I'm finally at peace with that. But he's mean too. It's taken a long time, and I could write a book about all the struggles in between, because
more than one book.
That, sounds right now, but.
One question that I have, how old was Jude on that January 1st experience?
He was 12.
And so that was 3 years ago.
Yeah, and he spent his 13th birthday in a state hospital, and I just remember lamenting that. That was so sad for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But something that is, as I've listened to this story, number one, my heart and my respect and just the humility that I feel and appreciation that I feel for you and being willing to, one, just share this story, but two, be able to do so in such a vulnerable way with so much faith in a higher power, in God, to be able to walk you through this. That is extremely inspiring to me. I also want to point out that through all of this, and you shared this at the very beginning in relation to just your desire to be a mother and to follow God's will for you in being a mother and bringing those children that He wants you to bring into this life, that you did not waver. And so you were having children and welcoming children into your family as you were experiencing all of this.
Yeah.
And then you get to beautiful Mabel and you find out Mabel has Down syndrome, all while you're experiencing this. And
Yeah.
then you go forward with faith and you bring Silas into this into this life. And so I can't express enough how thankful I am for your faith and your example, and to your amazing husband for his example and his faith. So thank you for being willing to share that. And I don't want this just focus on Jude that we have had thus far to really overshadow the other amazing things that you're doing in addition to the work that you're doing with Jude. Now, for those that follow your Instagram channel and see the progress that Jude has been making, this is amazing. Can you share a little bit about that right now?
So he has made I would say almost a complete 180-degree turn in the right direction. I mean, when we dropped him off that day in April of whatever year it was at the Lufkin State Supported Living Center, I was like, this is his home. This is where he'll be for his life, and we'll come and we'll visit and we'll have relationships with the people here. I did not think that he would leave. Like, at best, he would go to a community group home. Yep. And we're talking about moving him home. So in the next 3 months, and it's so scary. Wow. It is so scary, but we're it's just another season of faith that we're, because you do get used to having this security blanket at the facility of hey, bring him in, and then we send him back, and we feel normal life again, and it's we're going back to a different life, but we're committed to our son, and we're also committed to our other children too. So we're praying through that about what is best for the family as a whole. But we do feel like it's going to be back here at our house. So we're doing these long home visits. So we get these 3-night home visits. You can just take him back for a night and then bring him back again for as long as you have one night in between, you keep your bed. So we're doing as many of those as we can and just seeing if it continues to go well. And so when we transition him back, he has a year to basically be followed by the State Supported Living Center. And if it's not a good fit, if being at home, just if he has a lot of regression, he keeps his bed. So he can go back if he needs to go back. So, but yeah, I mean, being at the State Supported Living Center they have 24-hour care. They record data every day, all day. The doctors are able to really see the behavior patterns and see what medications are working. Medication is really what turned his life around. And I've gone through different, stances on medication for a while. We were like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to medicate him. And then, yes, we're going to medicate him, or no, we're going to do all natural, or we're going to do diet, or blah, blah, blah. So you have to go down all those paths. You have to exhaust them all. But Jude will have to live on medication. He's on a lot of psychotropic medications, and it has stabilized him. Now, it's also been challenging to balance the side effects, things like that, but he is very stable, very stable. And so, and his siblings are enjoying him, and they were starting to ask, when can he come back? When can he stay here? And so we were like, okay, we need to start having this conversation. I can't believe we're having this conversation, but I'm thrilled, and I'm scared to death that we're having the conversation, but it's good. And we have a lot of support. We have a lot of support with the public school. He's going to be coming home on a waiver program. So he'll have all of his hours back. We can have in-home support. But yeah, and then of course I attribute just the consistency there at the state school, the routine, the fact that things are locked up there. There's no pantry, there's no, just things that cause issues at home. Everything's very controlled. So But yeah, so it's crazy.
Seeing the progress and seeing the visits
Yeah.
and just seeing the progress that is transpiring there. I'm actually really anxious to watch the rest of this story unfold because I think it is going to be a beautiful, beautiful thing. And the one thing that we have found with you is regardless of the direction that it goes, whether that's your will or potentially a different path that this direction will go, I'm 100% confident in your resilience and your faith. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. I would love to ask you, I've done a lot of these podcasts. I've had a lot of wonderful, inspiring guests, many guests that have a very challenging path ahead of them, and they're experiencing a very challenging path. I have never heard a more challenging path than yours, though. And that is just, again, a testament to your faith in how you've been able to weather this. But I know without a shadow of a doubt that there are other families that are currently at the beginning of the path that you, ironically enough, have weathered thus far for the last 15 years and are facing this diagnosis of autism and even potentially severe autism with fear. And I would love for you to speak to them, having been through this path, if you could share some wisdom with them.
I used to pep talk myself a lot and say a bad day does not equal a bad life. When you're in the thick of severe autism, I think the emotion that you fight the most is fear. I mean, debilitating fear, like not just like, not even just the what's going to happen to my kid when they're gone, but like, I don't know, transparent, but like, is my kid going to kill me? I'm like, I hate to say that, but like, is he going to hurt one of my other kids? Like, is my kid going to run out in front of a car? Like heavy, heavy fear.
Yep.
I remember Jude getting into a highway one time, and I was pregnant at that time. I couldn't stop him. And my husband came bolting out of my peripheral and tackled him in front of like a Long John Silver. We were in front of our church. And I was like hyperventilating on the side of the road, like, he almost died, he almost died, he almost died. And when I kind of came to and I started praying, I was reading in the Psalms about how like he sends his angels to like come down, to like protect people. And I was just like, you know what? No, he didn't almost die. Like, God stopped those cars with an angel, and he's going to keep stopping cars, and he's going to keep stopping Jude until it's time for Jude to go home. And to somehow really come to a place where yes, we do our best as parents, and we do what we can do, but ultimately, like, the days of our children are held in God's hands. And it really has so little to do with us. God has a plan for your child and for your child's disability. Nothing is wasted. Elizabeth Elliot says, there is no place too dark where God cannot shine his glory. Like there is no scenario, there's no story that is just too shameful or too scary or too heavy for God not to get glory there. Like he will, and it will be for your good, for your betterment, and it will be to bring many people to know him. None of it will be wasted. I have a friend whose son is Jude's roommate, and she's a strong believer. And she said, I was just bathing PAX the other day. We had a horrible day, and he's one that runs out in front of cars constantly. And he thinks it's hilarious. And she started through tears saying, God, none of this is wasted. None of this is wasted. God, I know you're going to use all of it. Just know that not even 1 ounce, not one moment is wasted. Like, these children are not accidents. And, John Piper says, if you don't believe that God creates people with disabilities, you have a head-on collision with Psalm 139 that says he knit us together in our mother's womb. All of this is for a reason. And along the way, you will meet some of the greats because you're in a different league now. You're with special needs parents. And not to toot our own horn, but our sufferings have made us a different person. And, it's like we can meet a stranger. And if you see that they have a child with autism or some sort of disability, you're like, those are my people. And those, they're good. They're heroes, and there will be good along the way. I would say to find your community of people that will support you. And it may not be on these huge forums. Some of my greatest criticism has come from some of these autism forums. They're very divided.
Yeah.
My people are moms that have aggressive kids. Those are my people.
Yep.
So find your people, surround yourself with them. And that's what I would say to them.
I want to thank you for being an instrument in God's hands and for being able to be a very special instrument in God's hands, because that's exactly what you're doing. And that's exactly what you did today for myself and for our listeners. And so nothing is wasted, as you say, that everything has a purpose. And Jude and these beautiful children and these unique experiences have been entrusted to us for a reason. And you are a tremendous example of somebody that is taking those and making beautiful, beautiful miracles for many other people. So it's been amazing to have you on the show, Lainey. Thank you again, and God bless. We wish you very well, and we can't wait to continue to follow the journey.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conquering Your Clownfish. If you liked what we discussed on the podcast today and want to continue the conversation, please visit us at conqueringyourclownfish.com. And please don't forget to subscribe.